Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razam Pereira. US President Donald Trump landed in Ahmedabad on Monday for his first visit to India, to a grand welcome by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and thousands of people who lined the streets and packed into the Motera Stadium to say Namaste Trump. There were tableau, folk dancers and musicians rolling out the cultural tapestry that is India at the airport, on the way, and at the spanking new cricket stadium where about 1 lakh people waited patiently since early in the morning to hear the two leaders speak. In the evening, Trump and First Lady Melania visited the iconic Taj Mahal as they marveled at the famed 17th century Mughal-era mausoleum built as a monument of love. Commenting on the Trump visit, Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Ravish Kumar tweeted that this is the first standalone visit by a US president to India, exemplifying a historic relationship that has matured into a 21st century global partnership. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will look back at day one of President Trump's visit to India and what to expect on day two. Joining me on the program today are Neeraj Srivastava, former ambassador; Swaran Singh, Chairperson, Center for International Politics, JNU; Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation; and also Yoshita Singh, Chief Correspondent of the PTI in New York. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. General, let me begin the program with you. What was the key highlight for you on day one of US President Donald Trump's visit to India?
I think what really happened was the optics was absolutely outstanding. And when we are talking of relationship between two countries, I think it is exemplified by the relationship between the two leaders of those two countries. And what came across was a very, very warm reception given by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to President Donald Trump. And I think when he spoke, when President Donald Trump spoke, he reciprocated that in full measure. The second aspect, which I thought was very, very pleasing to the eye, was the way the scale of the reception which was there, all the way from the airport to the Sabarmati Ashram, the visit to the Sabarmati Ashram per se, the sight of President Donald Trump and the First Lady actually sitting down on the charkha. It is the humblest of all humblest abodes, a place which is absolutely bare, which is barren, which just has a charkha, and you have the most powerful man in the universe, so to say, sitting down in that abode and spinning a thread. I think that was the legacy of Gandhi. The sheer contrast of what Gandhi was and what President Trump is, and both of them meeting at that point. I think that made for very good optics too, and I believe personally that President Trump and his wife will remember that visit for a very, very long time. The third thing which I think came out was the way it looked to me was, I think the people-to-people relationship has been very, very strong. And when we are building relationship between two countries, there is a political aspect to it, there is an economic aspect to it, there are many other aspects to it, but a very important aspect is the people-to-people relationship. And I think what really came out is the love which the people of India have for the people of the United States. I believe that it is reciprocated by both sides.
Right.
So this is a very strong partnership between the biggest democracy and the oldest democracy. So what we witnessed today was the dance of democracies.
Okay, dance of democracies. This was something that we witnessed quite literally and figuratively on our screens all through the day, all through the course of the day. Professor, do you believe that we've been able to make an impression in the mind of President Trump as far as the visit on day one is concerned? Because let's not forget that we did make an impression when Ivanka Trump was here a couple of years ago. We rolled out the red carpet for her in Hyderabad. Many people questioned why we were doing that, but we saw that that resulted in a very strong relationship between India and the United States. Do you believe the same kind of message has been driven home today as well?
I think in history of last 7 decades, other than President Nixon visiting India, India has been able to change the perceptions of all visiting presidents of United States, and one could have specific examples from Eisenhower onwards. Second, I think it's been built, this huge celebration is built on this whole transformation of the two countries. So from both sides there are several firsts here. To just come out and talk about this visit alone it is very rare. First of all, the impression is that President Trump doesn't really enjoy traveling. This is the only second time when his wife Melania has accompanied him on a foreign visit. This is the first time American president has come with 3 other members of his family. Several firsts on both sides in that sense. So the number of people who were there to listen to him, and I think the way India has orchestrated this whole, both the modern prowess of showing world's largest stadium to the president, showing the largest gathering which India could bring together with such finesse, and then taking him to Taj Mahal. Our inheritance, showcasing cultural diversity through those dancers and music and other things. And I think President Trump, apparently from his body language, looked really engaged with these things, really enjoying and sort of soaking these things into his mind. We saw him engaging in terms of having eye contact with dancers, or even clapping when he arrived at Agra. I think he was also trying to connect with the people on the ground, particularly the Agra part of the visit. When Prime Minister was not with him, we saw him being equally comfortable in terms of a very relaxed pace of walking about 1.5 kilometers, spending about 60 minutes or so in Taj, and finally allowing everybody who wanted a selfie or a photograph with the couple. I think that showed that gradually he had really begun to feel at home and enjoy that part of celebration, and that's what the purpose was.
Right.
To sort of front load cultural diplomacy, build that atmospherics, to have the tough discussions which will happen tomorrow morning. So I think it was well calibrated to showcase a whole range of India's capacities and advantages. And just like we have been able to change perceptions of almost all other presidents from United States who visited India, I think we'll soon see that there is a clear change in President Trump's behavior and understanding of India as well.
Absolutely. Ambassador, let me come to you now. Talking about first, the professor, of course, listed quite a few, but another one, of course, is the fact that it is the first standalone visit by a US president to India, and that in itself is extremely significant. What kind of a message does it send out?
I think the message it sends out is that the United States values India as a partner in both regional security and security in the wider Indo-Pacific. A panelist before me said that President Trump doesn't really like traveling, so that makes this visit all the more special, because he's traveled more than 8,000 miles just to visit India and just to spend 2 nights here, and with his family, with his wife, with his daughter and son-in-law. So, and he set aside 1 full day for the interaction between him and Prime Minister Modi, and the people-to-people contacts between India and the United States. And I think it was good that this visit was front-loaded with human interaction, before the difficult part of discussing issues came up. Because invariably one finds that, as human beings, if we connect with each other, then negotiations become easier. And genuine human warmth never fails to rub off on each other. And I think the visuals we saw today in Ahmedabad clearly conveyed this message that the personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump was working. This is not the first time they have met. This is almost 4th or 5th time they have met in the last several months.
Right.
By now they have come to know each other, and I think this was on display today.
Sure. Okay. All right. That was day 1. We are now joined by Patrick Gerard Buchan, Fellow, Indo-Pacific Security Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Patrick, as far as this particular visit is concerned, what's the political message? Because let's not forget that there's an election which is around the corner, and it's an election year in the United States. November 2020 is not too far away from now. So is there a political message that President Trump would like to drive home as far as this visit is concerned?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me on your program. Look, there's always a political angle to any international visit, but I would suggest that this visit to India by President Trump is not driven primarily here in the United States by domestic political consideration. It is driven mostly by, look, as the President himself said, we're close to a trade deal, a large trade deal, but one that hasn't yet been achieved. So certainly backing on from Prime Minister Modi's very successful visit here to the United States in September last year, this is again about improving the relationship between the two leaders of, some of the largest countries in the world.
Okay, so what is it that President Trump would like to gain from this visit, or would like to take away from this visit?
I would say that the first thing is again working towards, between these two giant economies, working towards a free trade agreement, reducing the regulatory and trade barriers that continue to exist. Certainly, I think both sides would like to see an enhanced and open trade agreement. They're in the early stages of that. There remains, a lot of barriers to get over on things such as particularly agricultural products and what have you. Also things like on the Indian side, the H-1B technical visas here in the United States. So there are these things that need to be worked through. But from President Trump's point of view, for his visit, and it's a lightning visit. It's a 2-day visit, one night in India. So certainly it's on that, getting that a trade deal in place. But secondly, it's the strategic. It's about bringing India and the United States as two enormous political and military powers closer together, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, all right, Patrick, do stay with us. I'm going to come back to you for a couple more reactions during the course of the program. But taking the discussion forward, since we've spoken about day one at length, let's look ahead now and talk about what to expect on day two. General, as far as trade is concerned, maybe not too many big ticket announcements are going to be made. Clearly, it's work in progress, and that's going to take place. But as far as defense and on the strategic front, there are quite a few big bang announcements likely to be made.
Yes, but on trade, I would just like to give one small comment before I get on to the second part of it. I think this is still a work in being. And while there may not be any agreement, which is certainly on the card, there will be no agreement. I think they can certainly set the groundwork for a future trade deal, and that could be driven by the discussion between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. Now, when you're looking into the strategic relationship, I think there are three key concerns of both the countries. One is with relation to China on the Indo-Pacific, where both the United States and India have this we are aligned onto stating that we want a free and open Indo-Pacific, and this is the point where China really comes in, where it seeks to be hegemonistic, and especially in the South China Sea, it seeks to impose its will on all its neighbors. Now, that is something which is not aligned to what the United States and what India think. So this is one area, I think, of convergence. The second part, when we still continue with the Indian Ocean, I think as a part of the security architecture, the United States is gradually veering out of West Asia. Not that they're moving out of West Asia, it is that the focus which they had on West Asia earlier was when they were dependent on energy resources from there. But now the United States is self-sufficient in energy, and it's become a exporter. I believe it's the 6th largest exporter now. Their interest has actually shifted now, which is why they shift to the Indo-Pacific. I think for India, it is important that the Gulf remains stable, because any instability in the Gulf will result in a slowdown or a complete choke on the energy resources, which will hurt every single economy in Asia, and especially it will hurt India.
Right.
The third major point, I think, as far as where the convergences lie, is in a sense in Afghanistan, where the Americans are very keen to move out. Now, India is actually concerned with this moving out. While we both desire peace in Afghanistan, it is a question of how that peace is to be achieved.
Sure.
And an American withdrawal actually is not towards India's interests. For the simple reason that it doesn't appear to me that an American withdrawal will lead to peace.
Right.
So how that is going to work out is something I believe, I really hope that the two leaders discuss on the table. And the last point I have basically on West Asia, which I should have actually mentioned earlier, I think what India would really be looking to is a rapprochement in relations between the United States and Iran, and a similar rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, if the Gulf is to remain stable.
Absolutely. That's an ideal situation. Let's see if that happens or not. But Professor, do you believe that there are any set goals or set agenda really as far as day 2 is concerned? What is it that we would like both the leaders to see happening?
I think there are several items. If you see the whole pace of this 36 hours, it's really power-packed. And I think outcomes of several of these things will be more known to us as they will be made announcements tomorrow. President Trump has already mentioned about $2.6 billion deal for Seahawk helicopters. There is also discussion of Apache helicopters. There's also talk about integrated air defense systems. There's talk about P-8I surveillance aircrafts. There's talk about a whole lot of ballistic missile defense. Some of them are definitely going to be clinched tomorrow, and others are going to be done in coming time. So apparently the defense procurements have emerged as the locomotive of our bilateral relationship, in some sense also giving an indication that relationship is really moving forward, even if that so-called limited trade deal is not clinched right now. Even on that, you see, other than the defense, which is usually not seen as part of the usual trade, you will have some really agreements possibly announced tomorrow. One is on intellectual property protection, other is on trade facilitation, third one is on cooperation between the ExxonMobil and India's OIC, Indian Oil Corporation, for distribution of gas in remote areas. So these are all part of the trade. What we are saying is that the core contentious issues of tariffs or India being pushed out of the general system of references, or specific areas where India has now been declared as a developed country. Now those are areas which are not easy to really come to an easy agreement. And therefore you see in the morning, speaking at Ahmedabad in the morning, President Trump did mention of Prime Minister Modi being a real tough negotiator, which means both sides are really pursuing their national interest very seriously on those issues, and they're not going to be easy to clinch in a hurry. But I think there are a whole lot of other things where India sees United States as a source of advanced technology. United States sees us as an emerging major market for them, both of energy and defense equipment, and potentially for a whole lot of other things.
Absolutely.
So I think a whole range of issues will be clinched tomorrow, and finally I think some kind of a joint vision statement. And I think that's going to be the really future forward looking, in that what direction they want to take bilateral relations will be seen in that either a joint vision statement or as they address the press. I'm sure these are things which will tell us where they are taking the relationship in future, and things that they clinch tomorrow will be where we've already arrived.
Okay, all right. So, Ambassador, as far as India is concerned, what is it that we would like to take away from this visit?
I think what we would like to take away from this visit is that there are more than one thing. On trade, we will convey our bottom lines to the Trump administration in clear terms, because I don't think that we can compromise on those issues. For example, we did not sign in on the RCEP negotiations because they did not meet our some of our basic concerns. That is one thing. On the security side, we have some concerns about Afghanistan, which will be conveyed to President Trump. and because it has a direct spillover effect into Indian territory. If, for example, the Taliban again comes to power there, we may see increased attempts at terrorism. The other important thing which I hope we will convey to the US side is stability in the Gulf, and particularly with respect to Iran. We don't want a war between the United States and Iran breaking out in the Gulf. We have close to 8 million people living there, and it is not possible to repatriate all of them to India like we did, in the first Gulf War. So our bottom lines on all these issues will be conveyed to the President.
Sure.
In no uncertain terms. That is what I see happening.
Okay, all right. Patrick, as far as your area of expertise is concerned, which is the Indo-Pacific, what is the level of convergence and collaboration we can expect from both India and the United States in the Indo-Pacific? And how big a threat to both countries, perceive China to be? And are they willing to, and at what level are they willing to take on China in the region?
Yeah, that's look. That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? As your viewers would well know, the deep sense of the non-aligned movement, which pervaded through the Indian national security establishment and through Indian society, still does remain. So for the United States, drawing India into a more strategic partnership with the United States has been a long-held goal of U.S. foreign policy. We are a long way from the days of Mrs. Gandhi and Nixon and the sort of the colder relationship that we saw. The threat perception on China remains a key question, doesn't it? For the United States is far more forward-leaning when it comes to the issues that it faces in the Indo-Pacific with China, more than India is. Additionally, the visions between Washington and Delhi on what constitutes the Indo-Pacific region, and moreover, as the sort of concept known as the free and open Indo-Pacific, does vary. India obviously has a far more look-south policy into its immediate region in the Indian Ocean. The United States traditionally and remains focused very much on East Asia. So there is that threat perception. And of course for India, India shares a land border with China. That is an inescapable geographic strategic fact. Something people in Washington are well aware of. I certainly know from my time when I served in the Pentagon, the relationship with India remained key for when I was there during both the Obama and Trump administrations. So building this relationship with India, finding common strategic vision of the Indo-Pacific and the threat, opportunities and challenges that China presents remains a bipartisan goal here in Washington.
Okay, all right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time as far as today's edition of The Big Picture is concerned. We would like to stay back and chat a little more, but we've got another program to do at 10 p.m., which is India's World. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program, sharing your views and putting things into perspective. For us, what's coming out of this discussion is the fact that day one has